I will try to be brief, and Annie's story is absolutely fascinating for those who don't know it, and I know a lot of it is in your brochure. She was my classmate in medical school in Fort Worth, Texas, and when I first met her, as you will see, she's obviously beautiful and brilliant, but I couldn't possibly have known how interesting her story was that landed her to that point. It's in your brochure, but she grew up in a really poor village in Malawi, Africa, and so poor that her school was like drawing in the dirt with sticks. And an ER physician from Texas met her parents and tried to bring her dad back to give him more medical education. And the country wouldn't give him a visa, and so she said, well, can I take your oldest child then? And that was Annie. Oldest of 8 children. She was 17. The next thing she knew, 2 weeks later, she was landing in Texas, where she lived with that ER physician, finished high school. And long story short, she is now a gynecology oncologist in Houston, Texas, and has one of the busiest practices in the city. So it's amazing. Before she finished residency, she built a clinic and an orphanage in Malawi. The clinic sees over 300 patients a day, and the orphanage houses 125 kids. And my daughters and I had the privilege of going there last summer and working for a while. So I called Dr. Perkins and I said, you've been to Africa a few times, what should I take? And he said, well, you need to go to Alaska Medical Missions. I had never heard of it, so I called and made an appointment. I didn't know what I was doing. And when I got there, I was like, wow. For the providers in here who ever want to do any international mission work who have never been there, you need to go and see it. It's unbelievable, and there's every supply that you can think of. And it's not there, Jeremiah will find it. It's amazing. So they provided me with a huge suitcase full of thousands of dollars of supplies that I took to Annie's clinic. And I can definitely tell you, in part because of those supplies, there are women that are living now that wouldn't be, and there are children in Malawi who have a parent who would have been orphans. So without further ado, here's Dr. Alaniz.
Yes.
Oh. Okay. I'm not a very good public speaker, but I'm having to learn to become one. It's like a necessary evil, I guess, in some ways, right? So to do what I do, I have to do some public speaking. So I'll start. The lights, can they dim out a little bit? Can we dim the lights a little bit at the front? Just a little bit. Because I'll probably read some of this, so it's a little bit blurred. I just call this What's in Your Hands because I feel like, most of the time that we spend in Malawi, or for those of you who've gone on medical mission trips, one of the things that I think is a principle that I'm learning as I go and as I've come here and then I have to go back in Malawi is learning that even when you think you don't have anything, there's always something that you have that can be used. And so, I consider myself a village girl. I have no roots in the United States. I have no million-dollar pockets that I know. But somehow God has always shown me that there was something I had in my hands. And the people that came into my life were people that God showed them that they had something in their hands that they could do. So I just put a verse on there from Luke 9, verse 16, for those of you that know. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke them and gave them to the disciples and set before the crowd. This was when Jesus fed a crowd of, thousands of people with, 2 loaves of bread and fish. General information about Malawi. So Malawi is in Southeast Africa. Population is around 16.8 million. The life expectancy in Malawi is about 50 years at this point. It was about 47 years old, probably like 3-4 years ago, going up a little bit. It was ranked as one of the poorest countries in the world in 2017. 74% of the population lives below the international level of poverty, making about $1.25 a day. It's also been ranked as one of the worst places to be a mother, just simply because of the high rates of maternal and neonatal mortality. I was born as the oldest of 8 children. I grew up in a small village called Tonje, which is outside of Salima in Malawi. We had very minimal access to modern transportation. I remember being in 2nd grade and running, 15 to 20 miles to the nearest school. Shoes were luxury, books were luxury. Having a bag to put any sort of materials in was a luxury. Fastest transportation, you're trying to get to a hospital, would be a bicycle taxi, a donkey-driven cart, an ox cart. And the best way to carry heavy loads was usually on your head. You can't see very well over there, but there's a woman, this is incredible. She's got a huge load on her head. She has a baby on her back and 2 others that she's dragging along, and then another load of things that she's carrying. You will see that sight very often. And at the bottom, that's an ox cart that's basically, carrying goods and people that are sitting at the top. Clean water was a luxury as well. We would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to the river, carry water on our head. And most of the water sources we had, goats were drinking from there, cows drink from the same places. You also did your laundry there, and usually while you're at it, you would take a little bath. And then after that, you get your breakfast that we would cook on open fire. And then, you get up and you run to school for 15 to 20 miles. And getting late to school was not an excuse. You were still expected to be there on time. Diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, these were epidemics that would come off and on because most of the places where we got our water from was open. And so, in sanitation facilities are, far and in between. So during the rainy season, everything would get washed into our water sources. So it was not uncommon to see our, classmates and kids that we knew growing up with that would get a bout of diarrhea or dysentery, and, within 24, 48 hours, and they would be dead. Education was not as big of a priority in a setting like this. Just being able to eat and not be hungry was important to most families. And so young girls were being raised to be independent so they can become resourceful. And at a young age, if your mom didn't make it, you would learn how to take care of the family. I remember when I was as young as 10, when my mom would sit me down every time before she would go to the hospital to have a baby and basically gave me the rundown of what I needed to know. This is where we keep this, and this is how you take care of that, because she knew that if this was one of those times when she wouldn't make it back home, then it was going to be my job to become the mother to my siblings. And at 10, I was supposed to be ready to do that, and there are a lot of children who are doing that now. Young boys are sent off to take care of cows and goats. Schools lacked books or materials. I remember sharing one book with 10 or 15 students, and you have to pass it around, copy your homework, and then make sure everybody had a turn with it. But in the midst of the poverty, what's interesting is always, there are kids that are visionaries and dreamers and entrepreneurs who are just simply lacking the opportunity to be able to get further in life, and I was one of those kids. There were so many occasions. I remember when we were in Tonje where I just kind of felt like the rest of the world didn't know that we were there. Nights were dark, usually about 7 o'clock at night when the lights go, when the sun sets. Most of Malawi is dark. Government has very minimal resources to help people. Outbreaks of cholera and dysentery will come around. And, when there was no rains, there would be hunger. I remember standing in line at some point There was corn that came from the United States. Now that, I've learned and known what the United States flag looks like. And I remember several occasions where myself and my siblings stood in line with bowls waiting to be given, corn that was just enough to feed you for maybe a day or two. The beauty was the strength of the communities. We literally took a village there to raise kids. There would be kids where their parents would die and people would just sort of pass them around and feed them every day. You kind of learned how to rely on each other. We would sit around at night and listen to our elders tell stories about our generations. And all our older women in the villages were respected because they had all the wisdom about how we would continue to live in Malawi. Again, diet was something that was very difficult to come around. Malnutrition, diseases were very common. Hunger was a very normal part of living. I remember when I first came here, one of the most interesting lessons I had, I went to a Sunday school class where they were teaching people how to feel hungry. I'd only been in the States for about a week, and I was 17 years old, and all I had known was feeling hungry every day. And I sat in a room with the grown women that were crying because for the first time in their life, they had known what hunger was because they were actually learning how to control their eating habits. It was inconceivable to me that there were people that had grown up and had never felt hunger. It's something that I still try to kind of wrap my head around. Healthcare, again, like we talked about, was very minimal. Most hospitals 25 to 30 miles away, no 911 system, there were no ambulances. Maternal neonatal deaths were, pretty much an expected outcome. Hospitals always overcrowded and under-resourced. The pictures aren't very clear, but I have some of the pictures of like that at the bottom. That's people standing in lines outside the hospital waiting to get in, which is what you usually see. In 1994, Donna Ivy, who's up at the top, came to Malawi. She was on a short-term mission trip. Again, for her, she had to kind of ask herself, when she saw all the suffering and very little that she could do, she wanted to know what she could do more. And then for her, ultimately, what she had in her hand was the capacity to be able to pay for at least one kid to be able to attend education. And so, I was dreaming what would have been a pipe dream, which is I wanted to be a doctor someday, but in a village, chances that was going to happen were almost none. So Donna Ivy gave me a lottery ticket. And on July 4th, 1994, I was on my first plane ride from Malawi and landed at DFW. And there were fireworks, I guess, to welcome me into the United States. And I had one tiny suitcase. I was wearing whatever I had on and one other outfit in my little suitcase, and I think a couple little personal, like letters and, things that I had gotten from my friends, and that was what I landed in the States with. A few years after, I ended up going back to Malawi to visit. And I'd been in the US for 2 years at the time, and I think what was interesting to me was the plane ride landing into Malawi. After I had landed here and there were skyscrapers and there were lights everywhere, it was just the most beautiful thing I had seen coming, from the plane. Then all of a sudden we're landing in Lilongwe. For those of you that have gone to Malawi, there's like nothing. You look down and you see tiny little sort of dirt roads and just areas with like maybe tiny little villages and hardly any modern buildings. I think it was the first time that I could actually see the direct contrast between what my life had been for 2 years in the United States and then coming to Malawi. My life had changed so much and my country was exactly the same that it was 2 years before I left. Then at that point, I kind of started to ask myself, what was the plan for me to get the opportunity that I had, because there were other kids just like me that were just as smart, that could have done just as much. It was more like a beginning of me seeking what more was there other than me getting an education and making my life better. And so this was the birth of my calling, a new dream. But then I told myself, I have nothing. I'm a village girl. I don't know anyone. And so it kind of reminded me of when Moses was called, and God said to him, you know, you're going to go and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And his first thing was, you know, I mean, who am I? And I don't have anything. And he says, what do you have in your hands? And he said, I have a staff. And that was the beginning where God started to show him that even that's all he needed, because he put it down and he turned into a snake. And then later on along the journey, it was that staff that he held over the Red Sea and he parted. And they all walked on dry land. And so that was the process of me knowing that there was something that I had. And there was a reason why God went out of his way to bring Donna into my life and give me the opportunity to come to the United States. Is this playing?
In developing countries, there is poor, and then there is primitive. This is a place where growing food and hauling water by hand are the most important tasks of the day. We're going to high school is a big deal. We're going to college or starting a successful business pretty much gives you rock star status. But when you grow up here and end up here, well, that's another story altogether.
So, you know, that all looks good.
This is Dr. Annie Alaniz, an OBGYN oncologist fellow at York Memorial Hospital in York, Pennsylvania, and a native daughter of rural Malawi. And to the villages of this impoverished country, she is more than just the local girl who made good. In a world where 1 in 8 women die in childbirth, and where a child dies every 30 seconds from malaria, she represents a better, healthier future. This is Tanji village in eastern Malawi, where Annie spent much of her childhood. Like most of Malawi, it is plagued with health issues. HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera run rampant.
I want to thank you again for coming here, and I'm always proud to bring my friends from America with me, because I wanted to see where I grew up and why I'm the person that I am, because you made me a better person. And I'm always aware of all the needs that you have, and my hope is that in the future we can work together to make this a better place for all of us to live.
Annie's goal for many years now has been to return to her homeland following medical school and build a hospital that would provide first world health care to this third world country. It's a monumental task, but not unbelievable, especially when you consider where Annie came from and how she got to this point.
So this here is my classroom. This is where I attended 3rd grade. These were our desks and benches, basically bricks underneath and mud on top. This is still an actively used classroom. And most of the kids just felt privileged to be able to come to school. Not everybody gets that opportunity, and for them to be able to sit in a classroom, they were just lucky. So they wanted to do everything they should do to stay in schools. And this is specifically the church where we lived in. And that was my parents' bedroom. And the 6 of us slept in this room. So I can show you my crib. So actually my brother and I and my 5 sisters, this is where we slept. We essentially just had a mat on the floor. And because the room wasn't really big enough for all of us to have an individual place, what we did was 3 of us would sleep facing that wall, and the other 3 would face that wall, so we could all fit on one mat, and then our legs sort of crossed. Everyone else that lived here probably thought we lived in luxury, because we actually had an iron roof over our heads, a brick building around us, because then all our neighbors here lived in huts with grass. You know, most of these people, they grow corn, and this is like a typical place where they would store it. They keep goats and chickens for their food. I mean, most of what they have is what they grow. You know, this was a community. We all kind of grew up together. We played together. If you were sick, everybody came around and helped. And this lady is my neighbor, actually. She's been here very, very, very long. So, and this here is the daughter of one of the girls I grew up with. You want to say hello? She's a little shy.
Most kids who grow up in this environment stay here for life. But because of hard work and intelligence, Annie did what most kids never get to do in Malawi. She went to high school. And it was during that time that a missionary couple visiting from Texas made an offer that few people here could imagine or turn down. If Annie would move to Texas, she would get a free education and the opportunity to be a medical doctor. A highly unlikely option if she stayed in Malawi.
I mean, I'm 17. I'd never even been on a plane and traveled overseas. And probably had never seen that many white people in that one place. So I was nervous, but I also knew I was winning the lottery. I mean, you know, who wouldn't take it?
Annie embraced high school and even met her future husband Tony there in Texas. She was accepted to medical school where she was both impressive and inspirational. Annie's desire to become a medical student in the United States was born from watching her father Peter, a nurse practitioner by American standards, but a man with both the reputation and experience of a full-blown doctor in Malawi. And it was by witnessing both what Peter could treat and what he could not treat that fueled his oldest daughter's desire to go into medicine.
There was not very long ago a child that I saw in a district hospital that I was visiting that came in and otherwise looked very healthy, but had an attack of malaria, subsequently developed a very large spleen. Mom had to walk, you know, a good distance to be able to get to the hospital and had to take a bike the rest of the trip, and they showed up at the district hospital when the child was essentially almost, semi-conscious. All the efforts that we put into trying to save this child were basically to no positive outcome. I mean, we lost this child who had a hemoglobin of 3, which is close to nothing. There was essentially no blood supply, and that was from malaria.
For 2 many years, Annie and Peter had watched both children and mothers needlessly die from treatable diseases. And it is those experiences that has fueled Annie's desire to build a hospital in her homeland, a lifelong dream of both her and her father.
So we're standing right where the property is. So this is actually where the hospital is going to be.
Fulfilling that dream started several years ago, when Annie and Peter took a substantial financial risk and bought land next to the needy and extensive Maganga village outside of Salima.
Special visiting surgeons.
The ultimate goal? To build a sustainable, comprehensive village that would provide an economic boost to the entire Salima area. And it would start with a church, an orphanage, a school, and of course, a first-class hospital.
We want to be able to improve the treatment of HIV in pregnancy, to reduce the amount of neonatal HIV. We want to be able to improve and bring early diagnosis and treatment of HIV in newborns and children. We want to be able to teach people how to prevent malaria as well as to adequately treat malaria early, because this is a cause of death right now in this particular country, higher than HIV in kids under the age of 5. At this point in Malawi, the average lifespan is 40. Our goal is to try to increase that by 50%. We want the patients that come to this place be those patients that otherwise would have the opportunity to have their lifespan lengthened because they don't have the capability to pay for first world medicine, and we'll give them first world medicine.
So I am very proud today that my dad and I are finally standing in this place to introduce the beginning of this project that we've been dreaming about for several years. This is the first step of the beginning of land that was bought years ago, and we hadn't been able to start until today. So this was very exciting. We are seeing the dream unfold today. Yeah. This is great.
Such high aspirations require both divine and earthly intervention. Both Annie and Peter's devout faith has guided them through the hard times.
B. You wanna do A?
Watching Annie at home with her family in Pennsylvania further illustrates her dramatic rise from this rural African village to her current status as a U.S. doctor. Yet the trials to get to where she is today, and where she hopes to be, still pale in comparison to the daily struggles most families face in Malawi. With over 10% of the population now fighting AIDS, her dream is not just relevant. It is a necessary step if these African villages are to survive.
We want to see most Malawians accessing the best medical care, and they would want us to see them go back to their villages after coming to our clinic. The most dreadful thing is to see them go to the morgue. We want them to go back and continue with their lives and developing our country.
I really believe that this medical facility and this project that I'm involved in is the reason why I was given the incredible opportunity to pursue my dream in the United States. I think I was created for this. I think I was born to do it. I think my dad was my dad because this is what I was meant to do. So he was there to inspire me to become this. So I believe in this. This is what I'm living for. This is why I'm here.
So this is what the center looks like now. That's sort of like an aerial picture. I actually didn't know that you could find it on Google Maps. I mean, I didn't even know that we were like Googleable in Salima. But like, I'm shocked at what technology can do. I told my dad we can actually find their house and like, you know, throw something at them from here. Anyway, I think that scares him a little bit. We have the medical clinic is up at the front. So we actually have an outpatient center, and that's where we're seeing about 200 to 300 patients a day. So when I have 25 to 30 patients in the office and I'm complaining to my staff that they're trying to kill me, I try to remember that we see 300 a day there. And then right next to that is the new birthing center, which we're due to open that in January. And we have some solar buildings that are actually next to that, and then one that's very close to the church and school building. And then towards the back, we have the duplexes. They're duplex style homes, and this is where we have the kids that are at the orphanage. So there's usually a mom with about 10 to 12 kids. They live like families and siblings, and in fact, when you walk around, you'll find that the older kids are taking care of the younger kids, and the moms are moms that were widows from the villages. We kind of brought them in, and they created a natural bond because you have a woman who wants a child to take care of, somebody to love, and then kids that are looking for somebody to love them. And so they're extremely protective of the kids. When dinner time comes around, they're usually counting to make sure all their kids made it to dinner. It's really been a beautiful sort of developmental relationship and families that now the kids have. So we have 12 of those homes with 126 kids. The church and school building has about 300 kids that are attending school there. We also have some agricultural and economic development that's kind of at the back of that property. We have a garden there. We have some goats and some chickens. The kids finally have meat Wednesday. So there's a goat that dies every Wednesday. I know that's not very American, but it works there. So if you ever come to visit, don't name our goats because they'll end up on your lunch plate. And we have the electric grid, which again, there was an organization that donated a transformer for us a few years ago, but electricity is only on 4 to 5 hours a day. I was there with Tom Burke, and the best thing he brought with him was a bag with headlights. So we were operating with headlights most of the time because it's very difficult to get electricity. So our solar program is very small, but that's something that would be really useful in the future, because as long as you have sunlight, you have power. And, you know, it was a gift that was given to us from a church in Florida that has been amazing. We actually use that more than we use the national grid. Recently, there was a group of ladies from Florida that donated some sewing machines, so our ladies and the older girls are starting to learn how to sew. We understand that not all the kids are going to be able to get out and go through college, and so part of it is trying to kind of come up with ways to do more job training so that when the kids leave the orphanage, they're not going to just have lived in an institution. So it's very important to us to educate them. And then for the ones that aren't going to go on a college track, to give them the opportunity to have a skill that they can use to support themselves. The healthcare center, like we talked about, we're seeing 200 to 300 patients a day. I mean, that's about like 86,000 patients a year, and we're very busy. I mean, the lines are very long. Dr. Clark will tell you, you show up and there are people that have been sitting in line for hours, and they'll stay there through lunch. You know, we don't worry about what kind of scores you're going to get. They're happy to just be seen, and they'll wait for 5-6 hours if that's what they need to do. They will sleep outside and wait to be seen. We have one ultrasound machine that we used. I actually have a little Lumify is a company. They send you an ultrasound probe. I usually rent one before I go, and that's the most reliable imaging that you can get. So you can look at bowel with it, your appendix. We've even found pneumonias with it. Tom Berg drained a huge cyst with one of the medical students that was with us. You know, there was a lady who hadn't been able to eat because she had a huge liver cyst, and so every time she ate, she would get full. She looked very weak when she came in. She actually couldn't walk into the exam room. She crawled in. She came back the next day to see us, and she was walking on her feet because she finally was able to go home and eat. And I think without that, this woman wouldn't have made it that much longer because she had gotten so dehydrated and so weak. So we're also working on building an expectant women's shelter because a lot of the women have to walk very long to come to the clinic. We have a little girl at the clinic. Her name is Naomi. She was one of the girls that really inspired the idea of having the women's waiting shelter. And part of that is also seeing how many women will find a way to sleep under a tree across the street, wherever it is, to be the closest that they could be to a birthing center. So Naomi's mom was actually pregnant with twins, and she lives at a village about 25-30 miles away from Salima District Hospital. And when she was in labor, she actually took off and started walking to go to the district hospital. And she had two friends that were with her. And along the way, you know, she started having very strong contractions, and they realized that she needed to deliver. So her friends took her into one of the cornfields. She ended up delivering Naomi in the field, and soon after that started hemorrhaging. And she died on the side of the road with the other twin that hadn't been delivered. And her friends basically just cut the cord with a rock and tied a little piece of dirt cloth on Naomi and literally just walked her over to the orphanage. I mean, when they brought her there, the cord was still dripping with, you know, blood and dirt from the field where she'd been delivered. And those stories happen in Malawi more than the world wants to know it happens, as it does in many countries in Malawi, because most of these women can't just call 911 and be picked up, and they can't just go to a hospital that's, you know, next door to them. And so one of the things we'd like to do is actually have a shelter where some of these women that would walk very far, when they know they're close, they can at least come and stay before delivery. So the birthing center, we have 30 postpartum beds and antepartum beds and 10 delivery beds. We're hoping to be able to build at least 2 operating rooms, even if we can manage to do one, to be able to do C-sections there. And so that's pending funding. I hit the wrong button. I'm showing this slide because I'm not trying to fundraise, I promise. But we're showing you the numbers that we're seeing. And this is one of the challenges that I had started to realize and started to question myself. What had I started that I didn't think I had the ability to sustain? And so when we had looked at some of the expenses that we have at the clinic, I had realized at some point that we were running at a 49% deficit. And then I realized I had done a very irresponsible thing because we started something like this. And again, remember, I'm from Malawi. I don't have a big sending church because my sending church is the one you just saw. It's in the middle of the village. So they're not sending me funding to do what I'm doing. And, you know, then it's again, I'm saying to myself, you know, I'm not Oprah, you know, so how is this going to happen? And I'm a village girl with no connections. God, why did you let me start this? And, you know, I have no ability to know if anybody with $1 million pockets. So I had to start thinking what was in my hands. I had arms, I had legs, I had stamina. I mean, after all, I was a girl who woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning when I was 8 years old and carried 20 pounds of water on my head. I had that. And I know how to walk and I know how to run because that's what I did most of my life. And so what was in my hands to fix that 49% deficit, I started climbing Kilimanjaro 3 years ago. And I was a sea level creature. I'd never been up on a mountain. I went from climbing no mountains to 19,341 feet. And so 3 years ago, I came up with the idea of starting to climb the Kilimanjaro, where I would, you know, basically raise money. I realized there's, what do they call it, skin in your game, right? Is that the same? I always have to get these things right. And, I had to ask myself if I'm that serious about it, and people have to believe that I'm serious about what I'm doing in Malawi, then I have to put everything that I have in front of it. So what I would do is, I realized this was on most people's bucket list. It wasn't on mine because my whole life was camping. I didn't need to camp anymore. But it was on a lot of Americans. So I realized that if I recruited friends to come along and they would raise funds from their group of people that know I would raise funds, and when we would put it all together we would be able to do more than what I could do on my own. So, started doing the Kilimanjaro, and thus far, that's been the most successful fundraising I do to make up for the 49% deficit. Again, I think for all of us, as we go through life, when we think there's no way I can do anything, each one of us has something in their hands. And that's one of the things. And recently, we actually had another group because we're working on trying to build a secondary school, a high school for the kids. And there was a guy, sort of facing the same thing. He's very passionate about what we do with education of the kids. If we keep the kids at the orphanage and we don't educate them, we're not doing anything for them. So they need to live there with a trade. They need to live with an education. Otherwise, it's just an institution that keeps kids until they're 18 and 19, and then we throw them back into the same reason why they ended up back at the orphanage. So he got a group of, people here that are avid, bicycle riders, and they actually rode from Lilongwe to Salima, which is about 100 kilometers, goats, chickens, people along the road. And they did that 100K for $100,000, and they were able to make the goal, and actually very soon we're going to start constructing a high school. So again, what's in your hands? They had bicycles, and they knew how to ride. So, with the medical missions, I tell people the same way. The best way to find yourself, you lose yourself in the service of others. When you go on these trips, you're providing resources to areas that are very low resources. Where there's collaborative teaching, we always make sure that while we're there, you can't see the pictures very well. I had the only radiologist probably they had seen in the country, because when she went to the medical council and they were trying to figure out how to give her certification, they didn't even know what a radiologist was. And while she was there, she was in the hospital teaching people how to read chest x-rays, how to look at ultrasound. It was a great opportunity, and they were looking for her everywhere that she was. This last year, I took a urologist, and there's one urologist who comes as an expatriate in Malawi, but at the time that Lori was there with me last year, she was the only urologist in the entire country. When I go, I'm the only gynecological oncologist in the entire country with 16.8 million people. And so it is really, again, that's what I have in my hands. I can teach, and I can help the people that are there so that when we leave some of the techniques that we leave for them, they can continue doing that. Being able to have the opportunity to bring other doctors with me that can teach while we're there has been really a great opportunity to teach. and bring those skill sets. Some of the barriers that people will have, I don't want to go because I don't want to get sick. What if they kidnap me? What about violent crimes? You know, people worry about language and cultural issues. They worry about financial barriers. You know, there's always a way to get around that. So, you know, learn a few basic languages. I just found out there are 5 Malawians in Alaska. 2 of them are right there. And so, pick up some Chichewa words, right? I spoke Chichewa tonight, and I haven't spoken Chichewa since I left home, you know, in June. And so, you know, learn a few words, be able to say hello. You know, you're not there to change the culture, so you don't need to stress out about the culture. You're there to provide a service, and you're not going to change things that are embedded into the culture in a matter of weeks. That is why you work with the local people that will continue to do that process of teaching. You know, understanding basic dress codes, personal interactions, relationships between people, and being flexible. I tell people all the time, Africans have all the time, and Americans have all the watches. It's a real struggle over there. Like he was talking about 30 minutes for somebody to go look for a key. I find people starting to have palpitations, and they can't breathe because we have a plan, and it's taking 30 minutes just to find a key. Sometimes we wake up with a plan, but what actually happens is something completely different. So those are some of the things that you learn while you're there. Fears of illness, I tell people go on the CDC website, figure out the vaccination recommendations. I encourage malaria prophylaxis. We have mosquito nets for everybody when they come. Washing your hands. If you can't peel it, don't eat it. That's what I tell people whenever we go there. And, you know, bringing the supplies of, you know, medications for yourself. You know, this is where things like, you know, the Alaska Medical Missions comes in, you know, because most of the things that we use, I mean, when Nancy came and she had a suitcase of supplies, I mean, you'd be amazed how, you know, it is difficult to find sterile gloves, you know, scissors that cut. Tom Burke and I were doing surgeries where we're almost like, you know, chewing through tissue to be able to cut through because those are things that you can't find. And somebody shows up and they have a suitcase full of actually instruments that cut. It's a gift. You find yourself celebrating things that we take, you know, for granted here most of the time. You know, safety. Malawi is a very safe country. I think whatever country you go to, it's important to know what their safety concerns are, and then, you know, what in your target locations. I always recommend traveling in a group. You can see most of the people we've gone with have been a large group of people, and also having a personal connection on the ground, I think, helps with some of those. And then always use caution, right? I mean, don't hold your very, you know, expensive, you know, phones and Rolex watches and show them to everyone. I mean, it's probably going to disappear. Pharmacy, this is one of the things we talked about, where the gift of having places like, you know, Alaska Medical Center, Medical Missions has been with very limited supplies. You have to think outside of the box all the time. You know, you find yourself using drugs that you've never used before in the States. Chloramphenicol is like a forbidden drug over there, but in Malawi, that's like the Zosyn. When people come in septic, that's the drug you write down, and you feel like you can't breathe while you're doing it, but it works there. So what they do is they have to calculate, you know, if the risk of somebody getting, you know, a major side effect or die from it is 3%, but you know that 97% of the people that are going to get the drug are going to do well, well, they take the 90% probability that somebody's going to do well. And so for us to be able to bring, you know, like a suitcase of medications that they wouldn't have, you know, that has been very, very helpful in the clinic. I mean, Nancy brought Rosefin, and it was like gold. I mean, it was like liquid gold. I mean, everybody that came in and they had temperatures of 103,